I'm Sawyer, and you're listening to our house, A to Z.
Okay, happy Easter week, everybody.
Happy Easter week, or what we hear often is Holy Week.
We don't hear that often.
We do hear it often.
And to be honest with you, every week is holy.
Every week is holy.
This is just me and being anti-religious again. So I want to apologize to any listeners out there who feel like I get a little crass with that. But when it comes to say Holy Week sounds very Catholic to me. It sounds very high church and reformed. And I feel like that's one of the errors of sort of religion, is that we pull a week out of the year and we say it's holy, but what we're really saying is that there's something special here that's not special about the rest of the year. And I think that's a mistake. When the Hebrew people were celebrating Passover, or when they were celebrating these, they were all set up, the feasts, the celebrations, they were all set up to remind people of what God did in places, yes. And so we celebrate Easter for the sake of its being, the resurrection of the Lord, not because it's holier than the other weeks.
Do you know, originally, I just looked this up, it said Greek and Roman. It came from the Greek and Roman liturgical books, and it used to be called Great Week.
Great, grand, wonderful.
It was called Great Week, they said, for a long time, and then it was renamed Holy Week in the 4th century.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Saint Athanasius and Epiphanasius.
Well, there you go.
There you go. In the 4th century.
That's a lot of
dubbed term Holy Week. But it was Great Week because of all the great things that God did.
Great, grand, wonderful.
I like Great Week better. Let's go back to that.
I know. Great Week. Isn't that cool?
Great week.
Great.
Well, I love that. And that is perfect because in the 4th century, the church was a very different thing. This is after 313 and Constantine. This is after the marriage of the church and the state. And it had become popular. No longer were Christians being martyred, but this was actually the sort of preliminary onset of what would become the Crusades, people forcing Christianity down people's throats. But at that point in history, they were actually bringing pagan traditions into the church.
Yeah.
Things like robes and candles.
Right.
None of these things were part of worshiping God. You didn't have priests in robes. You didn't have all these ceremonial aspects.
I thought that priests did have certain garments and stuff that they wore.
Going back to where? Oh, the Old Testament,
yeah.
Sure. But with the death of the Levitical priesthood and with the priesthood of believers and, it was all this no, it's not about whether you're circumcised or anything else that you have on. It's about your heart.
Right, because I thought some of it that was brought into the church was from the Old Testament, where there were certain candles and robes and things like that.
Not so much. That's Old Covenant stuff.
Que interessante.
So I think it's just important to know that all of that stuff was reintroduced.
Yes,
when
that's
it
true.
was made culturally appropriate. It was trendy to be a Christian, from the early 300s on. And so by the time some of these sayings like Holy Week came into the church, it was already unholy.
In the 4th century?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Absolutely. And that's when all sorts of gross corruption, that led into a lot of fallacy, a lot of heresy, a lot of gross stuff that was called holy.
Now, we don't say Holy Week. We're going to call it Great Week from now on.
Great, grand, wonderful.
Or the Great Week. I think it's just Great Week.
Great week.
But we still say Easter. We use that terminology.
Uh-oh.
Now what are you going to do?
What are you going to do?
You're going to argue with me now, sir.
I don't have issues with that. I know Ishtar and the whole goddess and the egg thing, even the rabbit and the egg.
But I looked all that up
things.
and I didn't see anything really weird about it. It was not really that big of a deal.
You didn't go into the dark web.
No, I don't want to go on the dark
You
web.
didn't search the doom and gloom prophecies. No,
To those who are pure, all things are pure.
Well, see, that's kind of the thing. So if you're pure about Santa Claus or
Oh, not this
Easter
again,
Bunny
babe. You're going to have people throwing tables right now in their houses.
I feel like anything and everything can point to the Lord. That's what I think.
Okay. Anyway, it is Good Friday when this is coming out.
Yeah, Good Friday. Which, by the way, we drove past a public school today and it said school is canceled on the 29th for Good Friday.
Yep.
And I was thought that was awesome.
Yeah, and I went to public school in Swansea, and a lot of Catholic families. There's a strong, Catholic.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.
Catholicism. What was I going to say?
Cathartic?
I was going to say.
Catholic?
I don't know what I was going to say. There's a strong Catholic emphasis, and a lot of Catholic families, and there was no meat served in the cafeteria during Lent.
That's so interesting.
Yep. And that was public school, public high school. Fish every Friday and no meat.
Now, in the South, where everybody's Baptist,
You didn't even know what Lent was.
I knew one Catholic person in my entire high school. I knew
Really?
one. Yep.
But what about Lent? Do you remember everybody? Do you remember Ash Wednesday? Did they do Ash Wednesday down there?
No.
Okay.
No. You heard about it.
Yeah.
Like, but it was never like you never saw people with ash on their forehead.
Okay.
And what was interesting, though, is down there, you never had any extracurricular thing on a Sunday, ever.
Right.
Like on a Sunday morning, at least. Maybe Sunday night, maybe, but very rarely.
But you know what? Growing up, I mean, I went to a Christian school, but growing up, I never remember stuff on Sundays. I feel like that's just a cultural thing across the board that has changed a lot. So I wonder now if it is different in the South, but...
Yeah. I don't know.
I remember going to public high school. I was in private Christian school from kindergarten through 8th grade, going to public high school. And that year was my first year that I saw the ashes on somebody's forehead. And I was like, what the heck is that? Because students were walking around on Ash Wednesday.
Interesting.
With that on their forehead. And I remember being like, what the heck is that? So it's very interesting. But now, speaking of trendy, I feel like a lot of even Protestant churches that we know have kind of like done the Ash Wednesday thing, practice Lent, all of that.
Well, there's that.
Does that just to bring back to like traditions or?
Is it called the Young Radical Reformed or something like that? I don't know. There's like some whole sect of like revival among Reformed theology, like where it's like young adults. But that was when we were young adults, which was like
I do remember that.
That was like 100 years ago.
I know it's interesting that you said trendy for the church thing, because I do feel like we're on this like precipice that we're seeing right now of a lot of young people seeing Christianity as trendy. It's kind of like a fun, I don't want to diminish it as like fun, but it's like, oh, all my friends are doing it. And there's a little bit of like a hyper spiritual vibe going on.
Sure.
That has been interesting and has definitely caused me to like think a little bit more like, what's the deeper thing here? What's going on? Is it real? How do we make sure this stuff is like real for kids and not just the emotional part of it?
Right. I love that. I think that you got to be careful. I think the church is always more pure when the church is persecuted. When people are being martyred for their faith, the church is very pure. Because
is there any way else that we can be pure?
No, I'm not saying as individuals. I'm saying the church itself. Like
Yeah.
the bride of Jesus is like at her best when you are literally choosing to give your life for it. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? When it's just neutral, then it's kind of neutral. But when it's popular is when it gets really dangerous, because now they're selling T-shirts at Target that say blessed, and stuff like that. And now it's like everybody's got their Instagram at church and, or whatever. It's like they're all doing this. I think those are the things that you do have to be careful that you're not just in this because it's cool.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I appreciate that a lot of like current, more relative Christian pastors don't seem so like outdated. I think that's really nice to have some like, like relatable people. And I think that does help.
Sure.
That's not all like a bad thing. I think it was really hard when you have just like men that are over like 70 years old in suits trying to relate. I think that makes it hard for people, and it seems like irrelevant.
Yeah.
Christianity in general. So I think we've seen a lot of that, a lot of upswing in whether it's the fashionable pastor kind of thing that is also joked and mocked, but I feel like has done a lot for appealing to a younger generation.
Well, I know we've done episodes in the past on celebrity pastors and stuff, and this is kind of where celebrity pastors I feel like they get a really bad rap. And I mean, you can go down every dark, twisted rabbit hole on YouTube with like how everybody's preaching Satan, because they're wearing skinny jeans and expensive tennis shoes or whatever.
They're like, this church took blood out of all their worship songs. You're like, how do you know that? You're like, did you talk to their worship pastor?
Right.
Did the pastor say it from the stage? We're no longer doing songs with blood in it? Or is it just...
Or is it because one Sunday happened and they didn't do a song that was like graphically violent?
And then somebody on YouTube or Instagram was like, did you know that such and such a church is no longer doing songs with blood in it?
Oh, yeah.
Like, check your sources. Check your sources.
Yeah, for sure. Please, God, please do it.
I know, speaking of, somebody wrote on our Google page today, but earlier this week, 1-star review, Google review.
Yes.
And they just wrote, hypocrites. That's it.
Amen.
No information.
I'm going to say guilty.
Anonymous Google, it was you. Anonymous Google review. Hypocrites.
Amen.
1 star.
That takes a lot of guts to be anonymous, to leave an anonymous review like that takes a lot of guts. Well, I hope they're listening, and thank you for that. It's good to keep us humble.
And at this point now, you're a hypocrite.
No,
if you're listening to this podcast and you wrote that.
I do think though that the celebrity pastor thing, it's like because people are outraged at the idea that young, passionate people can be cool and love Jesus. And that is just not true. That was like never really true. In fact, I think the Lord made it a point to deploy relevant people.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at Paul, these apostles, look at the selection of Timothy. So Timothy, he was like a hybrid, right? With one, I think his mom was a Jew and his dad was a Greek, or the other way around. Paul intentionally chooses, like, whether you're circumcised or not, or what group you can speak to based on the language you speak. And here he picks a young guy and leaves him over a growing church under his charge in Ephesus. And I think that we've got to understand that God chooses people who are relevant. God chooses people and anoints people who can speak a language in a time and in a season when it's going to matter. And so it's kind of foolish to be like, oh, this person's using lights, or this person has LED screens, or this person wears cool shoes or jackets or something. It's like, well, maybe that's actually part of like the anointing on them is that they can also see things and know what's aesthetically responsible for the generation they're called to minister to.
It's good.
You know?
It's interesting. Not that that's our topic today. I know
no, it's
we've
not,
kind of
but,
like gone down a little bit of a rabbit trail, but
yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a trendy minister. I think there's something wrong with being a trendy Christian.
Yeah.
Because now it's your walk with the Lord that is what it is because it's cool.
Yeah.
That's like saying my marriage is going to be really good around the marriage conference weekend.
I know.
You know, because it's cool this week, so we're going to wear matching whatever, or we're going to like ride to church together in the same car, or we're going to like make sure we plan our date nights because we're 3 weeks out from this and we want to
fit in,
set up an optics that looks right.
I know. And that's like the part where it's like, is it lining up with like the rest of your life? And I think that that's in conversations with like younger students. We've been having this conversation recently with some other youth leaders, and it's kind of like, hey, like we know that the Lord's doing a lot in you, but where are you seeing like the fruit in your life? And it can't be just like, well, I go to youth group every Friday night. It's like, okay, but are you responding to like your siblings in a way that like glorifies the Lord? Are you like treating your parents and are you with honor? Because that's also part of being a Christian. You know what I mean? Not just like I have Christian friends and we do Christian stuff together.
It's good.
It's all the little pieces. Anyway, so 2 weeks ago we talked about cult versus Christianity? Something like that.
Yeah, cult versus kingdom. Which one are we?
Cult versus kingdom. Which one are we? And so
if you missed that episode, we were kingdom, not cult.
We were kingdom, not cult. But anyway,
just to clear that up, especially for our 1-star Yelp reviewer. Or Google review, whatever it was.
That was a fun episode, but of course it has a little bit of like it can have a negative connotation on church because you're always like sifting through what you see in church through a critical eye.
Yeah.
And we were talking recently about how you can have...
Quick question. Can you leave a no-star review?
No.
Oh, it has to be 1 star.
Yeah. I mean, that's the lowest of the low.
1 star?
I think so.
See, I look at that and I'm like, there's still a star there. Like,
babe, that's because you don't have what I'm actually about to talk about.
Which is?
The critical eye.
The critical eye.
You don't have it. It's like...
I can tell you a list of people who would disagree with you on that.
Anyway, I believe you. But you don't really look at things through a lens to critique it. There's 2 different ways that we have a critical eye. And I feel like one way is because we want to like improve things, like we want to like help things get better, or there's like constructive criticism, you know? I feel like that's got a bad rap, but it's really not a bad thing. But then there's the other side where we're like looking at it negatively because we like want to, what's the word?
I would say because we have something to gain from it being wrong or bad.
Okay.
I think we have
I can
something
see
to
that
gain.
in a way. Yeah, where it's just like you want to have like something bad that you kind of like look at it at things, but you don't have any like without redemptive purposes.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Obviously, that's like the bad way to look at it. But if we're looking at the church as a Christian, we kind of wanted to talk about, instead of like the negative context that the world can look at the church through, the beauty that the church can behold by looking at itself in a way.
Okay.
Like when you look around, and I was thinking about this last night, we had our Easter Serve team in here, and we were just kind of prepping everybody, going through the new space, all the stuff. And I was just looking around like, wow, this is like impressive. Not the amount of people, but just the people. Like just so many. Some people I've known for my whole life. Some people 10 years, some people a year, but you're just thinking of all the different giftings that the Lord has brought here and what the Lord's done in people's lives and just the beauty and amazing things that can happen when the body's like functioning in a healthy way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, just like the beauty of the body of Christ.
Yes.
I think it's pertinent it being Easter weekend.
Yeah, great week.
It's a great week.
Great week. And a Good Friday. I love that. I feel like, yeah, we do. It's easy to kind of like poke holes in a thing. You say I'm not critical. I feel like I can be critical, but I think that unfortunately, a lot of our criticism just comes from being jaded. Like when you see the worst, and oftentimes we are presented with the worst.
Right.
But Jesus like gave his life so the Father could have the church back. You know, that's the hard thing. It's like as negative as we can be, we're forgetting like what the one perfect guy who ever lived, what he accomplished to become one with the bride. And so from the 100,000 foot view, from heaven's perspective, the church was worth redeeming, you know, and to me, that's enough. And I feel like this can be a very different conversation for people who are in ministry.
Yeah.
It can be a very different conversation for people who are maybe not dying, but who are giving their lives for the church. But I believe in the church. I believe in the church. I love the church, and I feel very much called to the church. It's important that if you're doing ministry, I'll start there, like judgment starts in our house, right? I believe that if you're doing ministry, it's really important that you have a healthy ecclesiology, that you have a healthy theology of the church. Like, what are we actually here for? It's not just to be browbeaten and pulpit rammed by holier than thou people. I think it's to continue to move forward, balancing humility and glory.
Yeah. It seems like one of those things that's so much easier like said than is actually being perceived or something. It's like so many people can view the church as like if you're serving in church, it's like, oh gosh, they'll take every last ounce of you and like make sure you're like your family's like neglected as long as you're like serving the church and as long as you're like they're cleaning the church. And how do you feel like for us, for HPC, how have we kind of approached that in a different way? How do you feel like we've approached that differently than maybe we've seen in the past?
That's a great question.
Like, how do you stop that from happening? Because we're a growing church and it comes with a lot of awesome, amazing things, but it comes with a lot of challenges. Like, hey, the bigger the church gets, there's a ton of work to be done.
Well, there is. I think accountability, and so that conference I was just at with another dozen and a half or so pastors, we broke off into a small group and we were talking about like what's the greatest thing that's missing with a church that had kind of like moved to the online thing. Like what's our argument? What's our defense for like saying no, we need to be in person. The future of the church is not virtual. That sort of thing.
Although some people think it is.
Oh, a lot of people think it is.
Yeah.
And you can get a certain measure of church doing that. You can put on VR goggles and have a whole what seems like church experience.
So
but
weird.
It's just not. But what's interesting is I believe that one of the biggest things that's missing in that mindset is accountability. And what I can say when it comes to discipline, when you say what's one way that we've sort of like mitigated that, is as a big church or as a church that's growing is to say, hey, we're holding people accountable. And here's what it looks like. And I remember I was in a breakout group with a guy that's planted 9 churches in 15 years, I think, and has, well, like at least a few thousand people between 4 campuses right now. And he was saying like, well, what does that look like? And I said, so what it looks like for me, my wife and I are over our worship department. And that if we feel like there's something that is out of order in somebody's life, if we feel like there's something unhealthy or that isn't in alignment, like we have no issue saying like in a really loving conversation, like, hey, like really going through that with somebody and then telling them to take some time and step away from the ministry so that they can focus on their life. That's happened across all of our ministries. I can't think of a department head who has not asked somebody, not gleefully, not enjoying it, but saying, hey, I love you too much to have you to continue to serve in a position we really need you serving in, by the way, but to have you continue to serve with X, Y, or Z going on in your life, in your home, in your marriage. And so I feel like, to me, when you say, what are we doing? I think holding folks accountable is like the number one thing, that makes a body healthy.
Yeah.
Maybe not the number one thing, but
No, but I think that's
top.
definitely a piece of it when it comes to like the service aspect. And I think you also have the other side of that is the accountability not in like just to like, are you doing okay? Are you healthy? But also like, hey, you can't do that much. Like, hey, that's going to be too much. That's not, even though you really
100%.
want to do that, like we're going to say
100%.
no to you doing that every single Sunday because really you need to worship with your family and that is hard to do.
Right.
As leaders, that is really hard to do because you know all the holes. You know what needs to be done, and being able to like see what the Lord's given you and say like, it's going to be okay if that hole doesn't get filled this week. It's going to be okay if we don't have a drummer or we don't have like these big things that you feel like we need it. Like you need all the pieces filled. And if we don't have a hospitality at that area, or we don't have somebody working this kids room, then you don't have somebody working that kids room. And now you're having to get creative and break up that classroom into different groups. And it's a lot more work. But if you're not doing it for the people you're actually doing it for, what are you doing it for?
Right.
And I think that's like
true.
one of the questions we constantly have to come back to. And it is really hard because you so quickly, your brain goes to the machine aspect of what needs to get done.
Well, because it's easier. It's easier to defend a system than it is the people that the system exists to serve. I think that's been one of the biggest issues is like when the church is, as an institution, eclipses the church as people. Don't get me wrong. I think the church as an institution does need to exist because it's the corporate piece of it. It's the whole of it. But it can't, like, you can't miss the trees for the forest. You know what I'm saying? And I think that that's what, as churches grow bigger, they become more system reliant. They become more, it's easier to hide in them. There's a wider margin of outliers from people that are in small groups and people that are in, here it's like, well, we have such a thriving group that's in greenhouses and they're in ministries and they're doing all this. So it's like, okay, there's so many good things. It's easier than in a small church to not pay attention to the bad things or the things that need work. And I think that that's the humility piece. It's not humility like we're groveling on the ground, like we're not worthy.
Right.
The humility to me is saying, no, there are things that still require attention, that still require grace and have not yet been touched by glory. And so we have to be cognizant of those things and pursuant of those things, and accountable with them.
Right. That's good. What would be another aspect that you feel like you look at the church body as a whole and you just like love? What's something that you love? And I know you're going to say like the worship part, but what else besides that?
Oh, you're going to just take that one?
Yes, I'm just going to take it.
It's just a throwaway.
And it's not a throwaway,
Wow.
but
okay,
I just want you to think harder than worship.
You said that. It doesn't really take me a lot of thinking. That's just my natural answer to everything. No, okay, so what that I love about it, or that's healthy? Or,
either one.
I think...
and maybe how you feel like we've been challenged and had to like, I don't want to say blaze our own path, but like say, okay, where are we going to challenge ourselves with how we've seen this done in the past?
Yeah. I think when a church is healthy, it's growing. And I don't always just mean numerically, but I do think that healthy things grow in size too. But it goes through life stages. There's like infancy, newborn, and like, adolescent church and middle age, all these different things. But I feel like when you see the next concentric circle own it, is one of the greatest blessings. When you watch people move from the receiving end to the giving end. And to me, that is Moses bringing the Hebrew people up the mountain with him. That's like what God always wanted. It was never just one leader at the top of a mountain. It may be one leader at the front of a line, but that leader's leading that line of people into the glory, not just going out to the tent and then coming back with a word, but constantly trying to call people up higher. And when a church is healthy, it happens. When a church is healthy, you don't have leaders who are constantly nervous about, wait, why is this person's small group so big?
Yeah.
Wait, why does this person have so many people attending their class? Like, I've been teaching SOS now for a couple semesters, and my class is always one of the smallest ones. And like, it's a little humbling. You're like, well, wait a minute. Why does Asha Kamanapali have like 50 people in her leadership class and I have like 3.5? Because, one person comes like half the semester and then bunks on mine. But I love it because what it says is like, God has entrusted our church with other great leaders and people who are anointed in their fields and people who will garner a following, not for themselves, but for the Lord. It's more than one person. That's the mark of a healthy church. And that's what I love is more than one person can say, follow me as I follow Christ.
Yeah.
It's not just a woman or a guy and everybody's following them as they follow Christ, but there is a growing number of people who are turning around and becoming increasingly aware of their sphere of influence and then being responsible with it.
I think one thing we've tried to do, we've spent like years trying to eradicate offense and like competition. And I feel like that is, you can like see it now. It's like sometimes you feel like you get glimpses now where you're like, wow, it's really working.
Yeah.
like, oh no, people are like repeating, like, we're not getting offended. Like, we're not going to be offended. We're not going to be, I mean, even within like a worship team, that is always it's really hard. We fight against that stuff all the time. It's the competition, whether it's this song or my song or I sing this. And usually I'm like, did you write that song? Because you didn't. So it's never going to be your song.
Right. Or you can write a song and other people still sing it.
And other people can sing it.
Imagine that. Better than you even.
And that stuff's hard. Those are hard pills to swallow. It's like we can see it as like knowing it's the right thing, but when you actually have to swallow that pill, it's way harder. And I think that we've seen in so many churches the struggle there where it's like the letting go of anything, the releasing control or ownership of pieces and letting them go literally causes ministries to like die. Because we don't want to, and so we suffocate them because we've held on too tightly.
Yeah.
And
pretty bird.
Polly, want a cracker? And I think if I could encourage like other church leaders, I think it would be in that aspect, that regard, whether it is like whoever does your media or who does hospitality or like who are you raising up? There has to be somebody else. Your whole job in any role that you play is to phase out of it, like is to find somebody else to fill that role. And we think about this all the time, whether it is worship or whether it's, I've done a lot of different tasks at the church since the church started. And I remember several years in knowing I needed to let things go and being like so upset about it. I mean, I was probably, I don't know, in my late 20s. And I remember like crying, thinking like, this is like my value. This is the only thing I'm good at. And how am I going to let these things go to somebody else, but knowing it was like the right thing to do.
Right.
And now as we've like grown some, it's become easier.
I remember those conversations.
I know. It's become a lot easier where now I don't find my value in a lot of those things. And I just want to be like, anybody, please take it. Please take this. Are there other things that are going to be way harder? Yeah, probably. Like I do think about the worship piece, and that's still a struggle for me to be like, oh yeah, don't you want somebody else leading worship? We still both feel super passionate about it and love doing it. And so would that be hard? Yeah. And I feel like the Lord's going to give us the right timing with how that will go to and whatever season that is and when it will look different.
I think we also have like, I think these are the places where it's really important to have a good group of elders.
Yeah.
You know, because I feel like when you have a good group of healthy elders who can look at the church from multiple perspectives and represent different ideas, they can say, hey, like, why don't you share the pulpit a little more? Or why don't you, why don't you raise up a couple other people? You probably should be, other people should be leading worship more often or something like that. And not just because you're not awesome at it anymore. I think that's what your mind goes to, but maybe just because it's the right season. I think that's
just our flesh, like no matter how you cut it.
But sometimes it's just the right thing in the right season to shift, to pivot. Yeah, no, I absolutely do think that some things are hard to let go of, but I also feel like this is the difference between a systems run church and a heart driven church.
Yeah.
Because if it's systems driven, you're going to be delegating tasks and releasing people to lead things because you know that it's a function of a healthy church.
Right.
But you're going to be doing it without really having that person prepared.
Yeah.
Or worse, selecting the wrong person.
I know.
And you're just looking for anybody to do it. And now it's like, okay, well, we have 3 people doing this month what only one person was doing last month.
Right.
So we're winning.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you might not be. You might actually be digging a grave
I know.
for yourself.
I know.
Well,
And-
your system technically worked because you're reproducing leaders, but you're not reproducing heart. And that becomes far more significant.
Right. And the heart piece is really hard. I know we've referenced Craig Rochelle's leadership podcast on here before, and he has always said like he'd rather have somebody with like the culture doing something than somebody who's really good at something doing something.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've literally can attest to that, like way more than I'd ever imagined we could attest to that. We can attest to that.
Yep.
And so I think even as like lay leaders, like when you're looking for people to raise up within your area, the culture piece is so huge. And knowing that people have the same heart for what you're doing, and they might not do it the exact same, or they might not do it as maybe you perceive as well, but just letting people do it. And like one of the things that they always say too is like good leaders don't delegate just tasks, they delegate responsibility. And that as a church leader and church as a whole, that's what really gets the whole machine functioning in a healthy way, because everybody's actually playing their piece. They're not just doing tasks.
Yeah.
They're running the whole entity.
Somebody came up to me yesterday, and we've been here like 12 plus hour days, like every day this week, because this is like the crazy week. This is great week.
It's great.
But somebody came up to me yesterday and said, hey, he said, I just want to thank you for trusting me with the area that you've trusted me. And I stopped for a second and like had to digest it. And because I think I probably wouldn't have chosen those words, but I realized what the delegation was, is I found myself, and I know that where this individual is coming from is that we had been asking him his like opinion on like how he wanted certain things done or set up or placed in a pretty significant like department area of the church. And I was like, oh, this is good. This is healthy. Like this is how it's supposed to be. Because I'm like always, I hear that and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, should we be? And then I'm like, oh yeah, we are. Like this is it. This is right. And it's not because you're saying, oh, we finally found somebody who won't screw it up. You're saying, oh no, we finally found somebody who really wants to carry the heart and who really wants to steward the culture.
Right.
And then yes, you risk it. Mm-hmm. You risk it, and it requires some coaching along the way. But to me, that is a marker of a healthy church. One where, like, here's another thing that happened this week. When we talk about systems, and me, everybody out there listening knows me, that I'm like anti systems and policy and procedure, and that's why I married my beautiful wife, because she knows how to run those things. But
because you're anti them.
Well, I think of like, conferences and things that we go to, and pastor talk, right? Church talk is like all these ministries that are known by their metrics, but all of those metrics, all of those systems, they're all just tools. And it's like talking about a contractor because of the tools that he has instead of because of what he produces. Like your dad has been a contractor for decades, and nobody's like, man, that guy's got a great set of screwdrivers. Mm-hmm. Nobody even sees the screwdrivers. You know what I'm saying? He may have like the best screwdrivers in the world, or he may have screwdrivers he got at like a yard sale. Oh, wow, did you see the skill saw that guys use? Like, it's like, yeah, you might have another pastor come along and be aware of that. But if we glorify the tools, then we miss the creator. Mm-hmm. We miss like what the heart is in the person who's actually the artist behind what's happening.
Right.
And the artist behind what's happening here is the Lord. Right. And so Tommy Rudkowski has come like every single day, and he's like just an awesome guy. He's like one of my friends. He's like a son/younger brother to me for the last 20 something years. And he's been with us since he was 12 playing guitar when it was like bigger than him. And we still give him grief about his Peach Strat. Remember that Stratocaster his aunt bought him for his birthday one year? It was awesome. So anyway, that's for you, Tommy. You're welcome. So he's been out like every day and working like a lot of like skilled work that requires somebody who knows and understands and is an engineering mind. And so he's been out doing stuff, and I'm like, the heart that he has is like what makes it so good. Mm-hmm. Because somebody else could come out and do that stuff, and you're sitting there constantly nervous that it's going to be a point of leverage. Right. But it's like, I know Tommy, and I love what he's doing because of who he is.
You don't have to worry about who he's working around because you're like, oh, he's not going to do this or say
Breeding
that
poison,
or like,
yeah.
all of it.
Yeah. So I feel like a healthy church is like when that's another indicator to me, is like you have somebody who has been long-term invested and committed and still sees the value in it enough to log like another full-time job's worth of hours here in a week because they believe in what's happening.
Right. It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. And it's hard not to talk about the body and not talk about the scripture about everybody being given different gifts. And I think that is it's so intentional. The Lord did it so intentionally with giving each individual a different gift to bring to the table. Oh my gosh, I'm like totally thinking, my mind's like blanking on the scripture for some reason.
Well, I mean, there's more than one place, but
I know.
When you talk about all the different gifts, and I think about all the different parts. Yeah, there's a Corinthians thing, but when you look even in Ephesians, and it talks about like all these things being fitted together.
Isn't it into like the full stature of Christ?
Well, that's the Ephesians.
The Ephesians 4.
Yeah, and so, but what's interesting is like the magic is not that all the pieces are there. The magic is in how they're all fitted together.
Right.
And the emphasis in the Greek there is on the ligaments and the tendons, not the body parts. It's the idea that like how all of these pieces come together. How are they joined? How do they manage to not just be a bucket of body parts, but actually like a fully functioning organism that can like meet needs and do things and bear fruit.
Right. And I love that. The crazy part about that is usually it can be like people are so quick to know what their gifting is, but that's not where the beauty is. It's not just in that each individual has the gifts.
It's how is it fitted together.
Yeah. And how you fit something together is by like submitting.
Whoa.
And that's what's like the crazy part about that is it's all in submission. Like every part is submitted to another part.
Oh, babe, you're preaching on Sunday now with those kind of words.
I'm not, but just think about how your
It'd be a
own
really
body
great
moves.
week.
Like nothing can move without it affecting something else, and something has to release the strength, to let another part
Are you saying
move.
the leg bone submits to the knee bone?
Yes, it's exactly what I'm saying.
I
Hip
think
bone.
I think it does. I think that the submission, that's going to have to be another podcast, because what is mutual submission?
Oof.
Dang
Babe,
it.
we're already at 40 minutes right
I
now.
know Ben told us to do a
gosh.
10-minute podcast this
Oh,
week
shoot.
because we thought that's all we're going to have time for.
But here we are, just
But
trying
it's
to catch
great
a break.
week. Hey, do me a favor out there. Have the best great week of your life. All right.
Great, grand, wonderful.
Happy Easter, everybody. We'll see you here next Friday on Our House.
This is Messer. And I'm Willa. This is our house from A to Z. Thanks for coming over.
No yelling on the bus!